If I would have heard this in pain, I would have said, "You're just telling me it's all in my head. You're telling me I need to change my thoughts." All of that is not true, and this stuff is better experienced than it is explained sometimes. But the research is really clear, and they took a group of patients with 100, over 150 patients with 10 years of low back pain, and the pain scores were 4 or higher on average. 10 years of pain. So they've done everything. They've done surgeries, they've done physical therapy. After 4 weeks of this treatment, two-thirds of the patients were pain-free. And this is a randomized controlled trial, which is the highest level gold standard in medical and scientific research.
The Research Labs podcast by SundayPyjamas.
Well, first of all, Arun, thank you so much. Since our first discussion, I've been talking about, what Menda health is to a lot of other guests who are coming on the show. I'm also discussing it with a lot of my friends, friends who are, let's say, in data science or in architecture. And I've been talking about the reversal therapy that we discussed. And even people who, for example, might not be chronic pain patients, they were able to relate to it. So it has been quite an interesting journey for me as well after we had a discussion that a lot of people are getting more and more. I was happy because a lot of people are getting more and more aware about it. And like there is a lot of information about, I would say, reversal, and there is a lot of information about how the brain perceives pain.
Sounds great. I'm so happy that you're sharing and spreading this education with others. It's really needed. And as you found out in this one interaction with this person, people who have pain are looking for answers. They're struggling. Anything that makes sense, that resonates, is really an eye opener. I actually was on a podcast maybe a month and a half ago with these two women, really wonderful people. And we started talking, and both of them have chronic pain. And it's a very hidden epidemic. People, 1 in 3 people, so people that we know are struggling. And anyways, it was scheduled to be a short discussion, and it went on almost an hour and a half because they were just, I mean, really relating to everything that I was sharing and everything from how our past experiences can influence our pain. And so I'm excited to get into more of all of it.
So, to begin with, now I'm very sure that, since you are doing Menda Health, you are very educated on the subject, since you are providing care to other patients. But could you share maybe how were the first experiences like? And how did you respond to it? In the sense, were you curious to understand where all this is coming from? Like, how did you
Yeah.
respond the first time you experienced something like this? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's my personal experience, and then there's the experience of starting to work with other people. My personal experience, so I had chronic pain for many years, about five. And in that 5 years, I was recommended a lot of different things by different doctors. And they were all very well meaning doctors and physicians and physical therapists. I did physical therapy for a long time. And the pain didn't get any better. So it started in my lower back and it got more intense and worse, and it spread to other areas in my body. Um, and I wasn't getting any answers for 5 years. For 2 of those years, I could not walk for more than a few minutes. I couldn't even wear a backpack. I couldn't sit down for very long. So it was very, very intense. And I share this because I think it gives some context to when I started to learn more about the research and the science that you were sharing with others, that I shared with you, that we tell all of our patients as well. Um, what we call modern pain neuroscience. When I started to learn about that, and it started to really feel resonant to me, and I could see myself in the descriptions of how pain continues and continues. And then I actually started to get better within a very relatively short time, actually about a month or a month and a half. And naturally, when you have an experience like that, where you've been, doing something or been in one state for 5 years, and then something shifts completely, um, I started to really believe that I had stumbled across the answer for everybody. So that was kind of one reaction, or in that moment, kind of an insight that I thought, okay, if I just shout this from the rooftops, people will listen and they'll change their life and everyone's going to get better and this is going to be an amazing thing. Well, unfortunately, it's not that simple. You know, two things. One, um, it's a concept that can contradict information that people have learned before. Um, Two, it's something new and it requires people to adjust and to be open, and those can be really hard things when you have a sense of what you think is going on in the present moment. So my experience through that whole process was uh, some people being open to it, but also a lot of resistance. Um, and so I had my own personal experience, which was, it still feels like a miracle at times. And then the experience of actually sharing it with others, working with others, realizing that people are individual, they're complex, they have their own wants and needs, and really the experience has shifted from me thinking that I know all the answers to actually listening and hearing and trying to understand where people are actually coming from. What have they gone through? What do they want? Versus, waving the flag and saying, "Hey, everybody, come with me."
So, when you say people already know things that are done in a certain way, and what you were able to uncover because of the research, let's say you were exposed to or you understood, was slightly different. And from what I have been able to understand is that pain is a response of the brain towards an external stimuli. Now, that stimuli can be anything from a physical event in front of you, or like a perception of the brain of that event. And so it's like a response to danger. But when you are like very young, that response can be, I would say, if you don't understand whether the event is dangerous or not, you are tend to respond in a different way. Or let's say you would fear things you don't need to, and if that happens over and over again, that kind of becomes a pattern in the brain. And then even when there is no danger, right, the brain starts responding as if there is danger. And that can cause pain, because pain is the system that our body has to protect us from that danger. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that's a good summary. I would add a few things if I could.
Mm-hmm. Please do.
Two important parts to this. One is that the part of our body that's involved, not just the brain, but it's called the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is 52 miles of nerves in your body that go from the brain stem down through the entire body to the tips of the fingers, tips of the toes. So you have 52 miles of nerves in your body. The complexity contained within those nerves, if you were to string them all out, it would go on and on and on, right? The complexity involved is incredible. And the reason why it's called the autonomic nervous system is that all of the functions that you're talking about are actually automatic. They're there for our survival. And so you used the word response. I think for a lot of this, it's automated. It's the brain's way of protecting us. It's the body's way of protecting us. And so we don't actually have a lot of control in how the autonomic nervous system functions. Um, and so that's one really important part. Um, and the second is that when people go through really difficult life experiences, so the autonomic nervous system is connected to 30 different organ systems in our body, from our heart rate to our breathing to our kidney function, etc. It's all connected, and it's kind of this interconnected tissue that controls how a lot of our organs function automatically, right? You don't have to think about breathing. It just happens. So that's a system that we're talking about, right? And if something scares you, your breathing will get faster. You don't have to think about that, right? It just happens. And so in the case of pain, when we go through, so pain is defined by the International Association for the Study of Pain, IASP. It's a global entity, as an emotional or physical experience. So it can be both emotional or physical pain. We know that those actually activate the same circuits in the brain, but to an event that can be internal or external. So you had mentioned external, which I think is really common, right? So let's say you have an injury.
Got it.
That's an
Yeah, yeah,
external event that'll cause pain in the body. What also happens is when you have an experience of pain, that's happening inside the body, and the body itself can become something that is threatening. Because when you're experiencing pain, it's hard to actually get any distance from that. So it's very uncomfortable. It's very unpleasant. It can prevent you from doing activities that you love. It can be something that can be hard to explain to other people. So it can be hard to connect about what you're experiencing. So there are internal danger signals as well as external. And what we say is outside the body, inside the body, and everything in between. So when you have an interaction or conversation with people, there's all this interplay, and the brain is always trying to figure out through what's called predictive coding. So past experiences to present day, am I safe or am I in danger? And the creation of pain is part of that whole system.
got it. From that definition, could you also maybe try to explain anxiety, and why do we feel anxious about, let's say, the future events a lot of times? Is it the
Yeah,
same
that's a great.
mechanism or it's something different?
It is very similar. So what anxiety is, if you have anxiety, you would say that I am feeling anxious, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And one thing that I think, know intuitively, but often don't think about is that anxiety is a feeling. Like when you feel your chest tightening, or you feel your heartbeat increasing, or your breath coming faster, right? That's a fear response. It's actually something is causing our fight or flight mechanism to activate. And the body is going into overdrive to respond to that stimuli that is causing our autonomic nervous system to go into overdrive. So again, it's the same system that's involved. And what we describe as anxiety, now people are becoming more and more aware of what that feels like, right? So they say, oh, I'm feeling anxious. Um, the the similarity is that it is involving the same system and the same kind of concept around predictive coding. So something in the past that causes us fear, the brain and the nervous system remember. It has a memory. It learns over time. And when we encounter a similar situation again, the body automatically goes into protection, defense, and the autonomic nervous system activates. So it can be as simple as, let's say you failed an exam, and the next time you walk into that class, or the next time you sit to do some homework for that class, you might feel anxious about it because your whole idea or identity about what it means to fail or succeed, there's a lot of danger involved in that, right? And you may not feel safe anymore in that experience that's happening today. Hopefully that makes sense.
So I would say ask this in particular, right? Because there are these two, I would say, descriptions that I get from, let's say, what I'm reading or what I'm hearing, not on the internet, but also from my friends. Two things, right? If it's a feeling, then we should experience anxiety because you experience emotions. But then there is also a phrase where they say, I suffer from anxiety. And if you suffer from it, then it kind of sounds as if it's a disease. You
Yeah,
don't experience it, you kind of suffer from it. Do you think
yeah.
there is any difference, or do you think one of them is wrong, or we are just making sense of it in a very wrong way?
It's not wrong, but there is a big difference. And the big difference is that our interpretation of what's happening inside the body is a really important part of the experience. And I'll give an example. Um, if we did not feel pain, most people immediate, initial reaction would be, wow, that sounds amazing. I would be overjoyed if I didn't feel any pain. Well, there's actually a group of infants that are born with a condition where they don't feel any pain. And the average lifespan is only yes, the average lifespan is only 3 years because they don't have the protective mechanism where we know not to touch a hot stove. We know not to step off a ledge because we've experienced the pain of doing those things in the past, and the brain remembers, don't do that. So there's this group of people that doesn't have that mechanism, and what actually happens to them is they end up getting really bad broken bones and bruises, and they end up injuring themselves so badly without even knowing it. Um, so pain is a necessary part of survival. Anxiety is also a necessary part of survival. And for anyone who is anxious or in pain, that can be a really uncomfortable thing to hear. Um, but that is the truth. And the second part of, just to come back to your question, so when we do experience pain or we do experience anxiety, both are very unpleasant experiences. Um, our reaction to that can either further the unpleasantness or the suffering, which is a really important word, or we can treat it as this is there and this is necessary for my survival. The brain is actually alerting me to something that's happening that I need to take care of, that I need to address.
It's like a notification system.
Yes, exactly. And when we interpret it as a bad thing over and over and over again, one, we get very good at interpreting it as a bad thing. That increases our suffering, that increases the amount of danger related to that experience.
It becomes like a vicious cycle after that.
And after enough time, it can even become our identity. I am someone with anxiety. I am someone with pain. A lot of what we do at Menda Health is we teach people how to get separation from those thoughts and those feelings about the experience itself, because that actually activates the nervous system more and more.
So what this kind of points towards is the power of thoughts, I would, in some ways. Like, I'm not like an expert in the medical field or something, but what I can, let's say, point towards is that in the old days, and when I say old days, let's say 10, 15, 20 years ago, uh, there was a pill for every kind of pain. If you have pain, you go to the doctor and they'll give you a pill for it, which was a very physical way to cure whatever is going on with you. And now, I would say with Menda Health, for example, since it's a non opioid treatment, you guys have kind of identified that, yeah, maybe the pills are not the most effective way to resolve this. There is a different root of this problem, and no matter how many pills you take, it's not gonna work out. And the real solution is to regulate your thinking in some ways or the other. Is that what it is?
So that's one aspect of it.
Okay, okay.
It is actually very difficult, maybe even impossible, to control our thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
What what we do is we say, okay, it's fine that the thoughts are there, but first let's recognize the connection between our thoughts, our feelings, and our the pain that we might be feeling. A great example of this is there's a condition called phantom limb pain. And maybe you've heard of this. Yeah, so when someone has an amputation of a limb, let's say a leg, it is a very common experience that they continue to experience pain in a limb that is no longer there, right? So what is happening in that experience? It's not the person's thoughts that are creating that pain. It's again, it's this autonomic nervous system that has formed a memory of that that sensation or that feeling. And I want to come back to the definition because I think it's important that we read the correct one. So the definition of pain in this international body: an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage. So there's a sensory and emotional experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage. So applying this definition to this case, we have someone who's feeling pain in a limb that's no longer there. The brain and the nervous system have remembered. It has a memory of a painful event in the past, and the treatment is actually really cool. They use something very effective called mirror therapy,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounds very fancy. It's actually very straightforward. They put a mirror between one leg and the other leg. And if you're looking at the mirror from one side, you can see a leg where there's actually no limb because you're seeing the reflection of the one that's there. What that does, and then they ask people to move the limb that is there, and it looks like the one that is not there is present and it's moving. What that does is actually tells the brain that this experience is safe, that the limb is actually there. And just by putting this mirror there and moving around, we can resolve pain completely. And if anyone's doubting that, go look up mirror therapy and some of the research. It's actually incredibly compelling. Um, so what we did there is we didn't change people's thoughts about the fact that they don't have a limb, but we introduced an experiential skill that can facilitate having an experience of safety. What that does then eventually is actually the thoughts start to change. And so a lot of the uh, a lot of the treatment is using a very skill-based approach to responding differently to what is showing up in the body. And it's not magical. It's not changing the thoughts. It's not, it's what we call, somatic skills, meaning mind body skills. So someone might look like they're meditating, but they close their eyes and they're doing a very specific set of guided exercises.
Yeah, yeah.
If I would have heard this in pain, I would have said, you're just telling me it's all in my head. You're telling me I need to change my thoughts. All of that is not true, and this stuff is better experienced than it is explained sometimes. But the research is really clear, and they took a group of patients with 100, over 150 patients with 10 years of low back pain, and the pain scores were 4 or higher on average. 10 years of pain. So they've done everything. They've done surgeries, they've done physical therapy. After 4 weeks of this treatment, 2/3 of the patients were pain-free. And this is a randomized controlled trial, which is the highest level gold standard in medical and scientific research. And this was done, one study at Harvard, Beth Israel, and the other was at Colorado University. Um, and so I, yeah, I just want to almost add some more color to your question, that thoughts are definitely part of the experience. But the treatment is not to say, just think positive, think positive. It's actually very much skill based. It's rooted in evidence and science. Um, and there's a lot more to it. Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I would say half a decade ago, I got introduced to something called NLP, neuro linguistic programming, where, and in NLP, right, they teach you something called anchoring, in the sense, if you condition uh, if you condition your brain to experience certain things using an external stimuli, for example a song or a touch, and if you keep on, let's say, experiencing excitement, for example, to a particular song, after a while it becomes wired in your brain, and you can just listen to the song and get excited on your own. You don't need to feel all of those things. The song will simply trigger those emotions inside of you. Is it something on those lines, or it's
Yeah.
slightly, I'm sure it's more sophisticated than that, but is it on those lines? What do you think?
Yeah. That's a great example. It is very similar to that. So our experience of pain is that often it can start with an injury, and then the weeks after an injury or the months, it's this experience where there can be a lot of suffering, right? So the concept that you're talking about is called neuroplasticity, which means the brain and the nervous system are actually learning how to associate experiences with feelings and thoughts and physical sensations. There's like a connection between that, right? Um, and so pain over time becomes something that we learn to be very fearful of. You use the example of getting excited about a song. In the case of pain, we become very fearful of movements because they cause pain.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So we start to learn that. Now imagine you can actually put someone in a completely different state of experience, right? Even though there may be some pain there, you start to form new neural pathways. Um, if someone's able to say, okay, this hurts, and I'm going to continue doing it because it's meaningful for me. Well, then you start to create new pathways, and what that does actually is dial down the pain itself. So I love the example you just gave. It's very very applicable. Yeah.
So I give this example because I would say this one simple example has helped me to face so many very challenging situations in my life. In the sense, I do have a playlist. Whenever I have something very crazy that I need to do, which completely freaks me out, I play the songs, I open my arms, and I'm like, okay, let's do this now in 5 minutes.
I love that.
It's just like this instant bump in enthusiasm and confidence, and it's almost magical if you ask me. Like 5 minutes before, I'm sleepy, I'm not in the mood, I'm like regretting to even show up to that place. Like, why, how did I get myself into this to begin with? Play the song, okay, let's do this.
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking about I watched the movie Three Idiots recently again, And for those who know, there's, the main character has a saying, it says, all is well. I
All
was
is
just
well. Yeah,
reminded of
yeah,
that. Yeah, it's like that, right? So
yeah.
having some
Yeah.
sayings, some mantras are really important. And I'll just say that when it comes to getting yourself in that mode, it can be challenging um, for a lot of people, especially when there's a lot of historical patterns of not being in that place. So it does take practice, and it takes skill, and it takes support as well.
Yeah, I was kind of introduced to it at a very young age when I probably would never, like, even if I tried to at that age, I would never understand the science of it. But I just kind of took it as like a formula. Okay, I do this, I feel good, let's go. It was kind of in a martial arts class before, basically.
Yeah, very intuitive for you. That's awesome.
This is, let's say, your experience of it, your understanding of it. How does the experience and the understanding, right, translate into doing something like Menda Health? Because that's taking all the knowledge and kind of providing it at scale. Also, you're going virtual, which means you can reach so many more people. So, how did the whole thing, how did the understanding transform itself into like a digital treatment care provider?
Yeah, it's an ongoing discovery. It's an ongoing exploration. When I recovered, naturally, you have this energy of wanting to share with other people and wanting to help other people, wanting to be in service. Um, and so I guess I'm one of the crazy ones that my first thought is, let's go start a company. It took me maybe about a year and a half to have that, to really come to that place of confidence. But even from that place of confidence, uh, we start something, and then, we've been doing it now for 2.5 years, and the concept and the delivery of it has changed so much in that period. And so, uh, at the very root of mental health is this passion and desire to want to serve others who have had experiences just like myself. And that's the thing that, really kind of gets me up in the morning. Um, and then the way that that's taken form, virtual care, we hire therapists to do a lot of this work. There's been a lot of evolution there. So we started off doing pain coaching, and I was actually one of the pain coaches. Um, and what was interesting about that is I realized I have very less training in this, and there are people in the healthcare system and establishment who have been through years of training on how to actually deliver some of these techniques. So we decided to switch, and now we take, in America, we take health insurance, which for a lot of people, that's how they're used to paying for, healthcare. So these are some of the kind of evolutionary pieces where we've had to evolve to really meet the needs of the people that we're trying to serve. Um, and so, now it's uh, a structured program that you join online, you join with a therapist in groups. And that's something that, is more accessible to folks. But again, the heart of that, and really what gets me, and actually both my co-founders had chronic pain. A lot of our team members have had chronic pain. What really gets us excited, because we get a lot of skepticism too, and I'll just share one quick story. We were on a committee panel pitching this to a group of people who are involved in health systems and health plans and hospitals. And we went through, a similar kind of story. And the first reaction was, so you're just teaching people how to cope with pain. you're not actually curing anything. And it, we get these reactions all the time. Um, and so how do I, kind of come back to, this is something that's really important and we still have to continue on and we still have to share this message. I always root it back to, well, I've had my own experience with this and it's hard for me to explain that to everyone and it's hard for everyone to grasp exactly what that means. But that is the truth that I experience. It's the truth of a lot of people that we've worked with, and um, kind of that being really the grounding part of this whole thing.
Like in a way, you are up against so many decades and decades of priming, right? Like all of us are just primed to think about pain in a very specific way, and then we're not just yeah, yeah. I'm sure. Like for a lot of people, it you might sound as if you have lost your mind, isn't it?
Maybe I have. Maybe I have. Yeah, that's absolutely true. There are decades and
So
decades,
I
and
was yeah, I was
yeah.
sharing about what you guys are doing to Jessica, for example, and I like the way I told her is that all the people who work at Menda Health, like all the co-founders, they themselves suffered from it. They were able to help themselves, and then they thought that they want to do it for the rest of you, like the rest of the patients. And then she's like, okay, I need to check this out now. And then she was like, why don't I know about this? And she just went in this mental roller coaster, in the sense, why am I not aware about this? Because like why is Prathamesh telling me about this? Why don't I know this on my own? Because I should be the one telling you about it. Like she just went in this whole spiral.
Yeah, we hear that all the time, and I don't know if I know the answer, but I do think um, there's this concept of in science of a paradigm shift. So when we believe something so strongly, and then there's enough evidence that builds and builds and builds that contradicts that thing, at some point we have a shift in the framework in which we think about things. Um, and so all I can say is that the paradigm that we're living in now is very strong. And I'll give one example. And I want to share this because anyone who might be listening, it's important that we start to unravel the old beliefs and we start to incorporate the new research in science. So the example, and maybe it's a question to you. Uh,
Yeah.
Most people believe that as you get older, your pain will increase and increase. And I want to ask you, what age do you think that is not true?
If it's not true.
Yeah, so most people think that as you get older, you'll experience more pain because your body becomes more fragile and more frail and more hunched over and more brittle. Um, there's an age in which that is actually not true. If you look at the research, could you guess what age that is?
If the perception that if you get old the pain increases, and if you're asking this question, then the number should be higher than what I'm thinking. So I'm thinking like 45. But
It's
I
higher than that.
think
Yeah. So
if yeah, exact, yeah, yeah. So if you're asking me that, then definitely it's not 45. So so
so
so
it's
I would say,
65.
yeah. Whoa.
So at 65 is when the prevalence of pain amongst the population actually decreases.
Wow. Really?
So people who are 75 are less likely to have pain than people who are 65. People who are 85 are less likely to have pain than people who are 65.
Wow. And how so? In the sense, what happens?
Well, what happens when we're 65?
Hmm. Most people retire.
Yeah.
I see. So are you saying because you stop working, you experience more pain?
No, it's the other way around. So let me start again. Um, the occurrence of pain increases until 65. So the number of people who have pain in their body goes up and up and up until 65, and after 65 it comes down
Because they stop working after that.
because they're no longer as stressed, as pressured, feeling like they need to prove themselves. Right? If you've met any, grandmother or grandfather, usually they're very unfiltered. They just say whatever they want to say. They don't care about the expectations or judgments. When people can live like that, their pain actually comes down. Um, and there's so many studies like this that actually are contradicting to the things that we believe about pain. Like many people believe that pain is due to posture, right? So if I'm sitting at my desk all day like this, then I'll feel pain in my neck. They did a study at the airline company, Boeing, where they looked at 3,000 employees from all job functions. So people sitting at a desk, to the executives who are making millions of dollars, to the people in the factory, and the people on the planes. And they looked at what are the things that lead to pain related disability for all the workers. And they only found that two things are correlated. It had nothing to do with job function. The first is stress scores. The more stressed people were, the more likely they were to have pain related disability. And the second, and this one kind of blew my mind too, is if they dislike their boss. If people go into work every day and it's a dangerous environment, meaning their boss is putting pressure and they're afraid to mess up, et cetera, et cetera. It's this really uncomfortable place. For 8 hours, you have to sit there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
People start to feel pain. And so all these ideas that we have around what we think the cause are, that's the old paradigm, which was started by someone named Rene Descartes in the 1900s. Um, and so I hope that anyone kind of listening to this really kind of takes away maybe an idea of curiosity and investigation and learning more about what we know today and what leading researchers how they see these conditions.
So, to I would say wrap this up, and also to kind of cue the discussion the next time we get to talk, hopefully as very soon. I think last time we discussed this book by Ga- Gaber Mate, Gaber Mate, and in the book he talks about how we live in a very toxic culture, and the book is called The Myth of Normal. And you told me that even you have been following him and following his work. So now the question is, yes, you are teaching people how to rethink pain in some way, and also teaching them skills to process it. But if we already live in an extremely toxic culture to begin with, do you feel it's going to be like more like an uphill battle for you guys for the mission that you have?
Perhaps, um, to me that doesn't matter. The truth is something that needs to be shared, and there's this experience where if you take a bunch of fruit and there's one rotten apple, that actually can affect the other apples in the bag. And this is actually the case. The other ones will go rotten more quickly. But if you take out that one, the health of the entire group will remain healthy. Yeah. And so in that experience, I think every single person that we can talk to, that we can share this with, including you, that maybe leads to one other person or five other people. And that is how the truth ends up spreading in small ways. So, a lot of what I believe, and one of my mentors talks about ripples, how we can throw a rock in a pond and we won't know how far that ripple will go and who it'll affect, and it'll be somewhere, something that we don't even touch or we think we didn't. So whether it's hard or easy, it's important.
Yeah. I'm thinking of this. Maybe this is like a wrong perspective, but I cannot get this thought out of my mind. For example, when we had the polio epidemic, or when we had the COVID-19 epidemic, pandemic, literally a pandemic, and we had the malaria crisis, it's still going on in a lot of parts of the world. Then the solution is to mitigate that completely by giving the vaccines, by giving medicines, by building infra to make sure that never happens before. That's like a success. That's success. That's how we calculate success. Oh, there is no malaria anymore. There is no polio anymore. So when we talk about mental health, for example, are we as the whole human society, right? Can we have like a point where there will be no requirement of therapists? Like, will be healthy enough to not need that anymore?
Now, coming back to the previous idea that pain, unpleasant sensations, anxiety are all automatic and they're necessary for our survival. Um, a goal that I think we should have is to reduce or eliminate the unnecessary suffering that comes with
Hmm.
that. And I think that's completely possible. Yeah.
Okay. I think this was fun.
Yeah. Asking great questions. Yeah.